The plate in front of me was still warm. "You've been freeloading long enough," he said. "Know your place, old man. Give up the bedroom, or pack your bags and get out." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I set my fork down, folded my napkin into a neat square, and said 2 words. "All right." He thought that was surrender. He thought an old plumber with nothing but a paid-off house and 31 years of memories was finished, done, ready to shrink into whatever corner he was pointed toward. 3 months later, my son had lost the house. This is that story. A quick note before we start. Some names and small details in this story have been changed, and a few scenes are dramatized for the sake of the telling. But the heart of it, a father who gave everything, a son who forgot what that costs, and the quiet, patient way, the truth finally came out. I want to tell you about a table first before I tell you about the dinner, because the table matters. You can't understand what my son took from me, or tried to take from me, without understanding what that table meant. I built it in 1991, in the garage of a house on Crenshaw Avenue in East Los Angeles, on a string of Saturday afternoons that stretched into a whole summer. My son Derek was 4 that summer. He'd toddle around my legs while I worked, handing me things I hadn't asked for, sandpaper mostly, holding it up to me like it was some kind of gift. I'd take it and thank him like he'd handed me gold, and he'd beam up at me with that gap-toothed 4-year-old grin. And for a few hours on those Saturdays, the whole world felt like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Carol used to stand in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder, watching the 2 of us, laughing at how seriously her little boy took his job as my assistant. I can still see her there if I close my eyes, faded jeans, hair pulled back, laughing at nothing in particular except the simple good luck of having a family in a garage on a Saturday. That was 34 years before the night I'm about to tell you about. 34 years of holidays at that table, of homework spread across it, of birthday cakes and report cards and the quiet ordinary meals that don't feel like anything special until you're old enough to understand. They were the whole point. I'm 68 years old. I spent 40 years as a plumber in Los Angeles, the kind of work where you fix what's broken in the walls other people don't want to think about, and I was good at it. Good enough to put my son through college on a plumber's wage, which is its own kind of magic trick if you've ever tried it. I was wrong about that. Or at least, I was wrong about one half of it. On the Friday I want to tell you about, the 1st of August, a warm evening, the way Eastleigh evenings are warm even after the sun goes down. I spent most of the afternoon in the kitchen. Vanessa Croft. I should tell you about her, because she matters to this story in ways I didn't understand yet on that Friday evening. She'd been in Derek's life for almost a year by then, 30 years old, raised in Beverly Hills, the kind of woman who walked into a room and took an inventory of it without seeming to try. Every time she'd visited before, I noticed the way her eyes moved, across the walls, the furniture, the kitchen tile, the way an inspector's eyes move when they're looking for damage, for reasons to walk away from a deal. Derek had told me once, proudly, that her father, Gerald Croft, owned a small chain of high-end restaurants across Southern California. I understood pretty quickly that in Vanessa's world, a retired plumber's house in Eastleigh paid off, solid, built with real hands, wasn't something to be proud of. It was something to be managed, explained away if it came up at all. I cooked the pot roast anyway. That's who I am. They arrived at 7:15. I heard the car door first. Vanessa's white Audi, the one that cost more than I'd made in some entire years of my working life. And then Derek's voice outside, clipped, a little too loud, the voice he used when he was performing for somebody. He was 34 that summer, my son. He worked in real estate sales, entry level, though the way he talked about it, you'd think he was closing 8-figure deals on Wilshire Boulevard every single afternoon of his life. He came in without knocking. He'd been doing that since he was a teenager, and I'd never minded, because it was still his home too, or so I thought. "Something smells good," Derek said, already looking down at his phone. "Pot roast," I told him. "Should be ready in about 10 minutes. Vanessa moved through the living room slowly. I watched her pause near the bookshelf, tilt her head at a framed photo of Carol and me on our wedding day, and then keep walking without a word. Dinner started quietly. Derek ate without looking up much. Vanessa took small, careful bites and asked nothing about the food, nothing about the house, nothing about me. I tried twice to get some conversation going, once about the neighborhood, once about a volunteer project I'd started, helping repair homes for elderly folks over in Boyle Heights, work that used my old trade for something that felt like it still mattered. It was during the second helping, when I stood to bring the cornbread in from the counter, that Derek set his fork down. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about the sleeping situation." I set the cornbread down. I sat back down across from him. "What about it?" "Vanessa needs a real room," he said it the way you'd state a fact about the weather. Flat, obvious, not up for debate. I looked at my son. Then I looked at Vanessa, who was staring at her plate with an expression of practiced patience, like an actress waiting calmly in the wings for her cue, because she already knew exactly what line was coming next. "That's my room," I said. "Dad, come on." There was a thin layer of irritation in his voice now, stretched over something harder underneath it. "You've got this whole house to yourself. You don't need the biggest room." "I've slept in that room for 30 years, I said. "Your mother and I picked it out the week we moved in." Something shifted in Derek's face. The thin layer peeled all the way back. The room went very still. "I want you to sit in that stillness with me for a second, because it's important." I became aware, all at once, of several small things. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the faint hush of traffic out on Crenshaw Avenue, the fact that Vanessa's face didn't change at all, didn't register even a flicker of surprise, which told me she'd known this speech was coming before Derek ever opened his mouth. I noticed Sandra's empty chair at the corner of the table, and I understood, without any bitterness at all, exactly why my daughter had chosen a hospital shift over this particular dinner. She'd probably known too. "Here's the thing I need you to understand about what happened next in my chest, because it surprised even me. It didn't cave in. I'd raised this boy, fed him, walked the floor with him through fevers, sat up with him through failed exams, and the particular heartbreaks that feel like the whole world ending when you're 17. I'd worked double shifts so he could go to a college I never could have afforded on my own. And here he was, sitting at a table I'd built with my own 2 hands, telling me to get out of my own 2 hands. What I felt wasn't grief. It wasn't even rage, not really. I set my fork down. I pushed my chair back. "All right, Derek," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. I stood up and walked toward the hallway. My hand found the wooden banister at the bottom of the stairs, the same banister I'd replaced twice over the years, because wood wears down when a family actually lives inside a house long enough to matter. But climbing those stairs, something had already started moving in the back of my mind, quiet, deliberate, the way water finds its own level without ever seeming to hurry. I just needed to let it find its way. I didn't know yet how far this was going to go. The storage room smelled like motor oil and old cardboard. I hadn't set foot in it in almost 2 years, not since I'd moved the last of Carol's gardening tools onto the back shelf and told myself I'd deal with them eventually. Eventually hadn't come yet. This was my house, and I was about to sleep in the storage room. I set the pillow down. I sat on the edge of the cot, and the frame creaked under my weight, a thin metal complaint that seemed to say exactly what I was too tired to say out loud myself. A single bulb overhead threw yellow light across the concrete floor. What I felt on that cot was the second kind. I reached into my shirt pocket for my reading glasses, and that's when I saw it. Derek's phone, face up on the little wooden shelf by the door. I should have left it alone, should have gone to sleep and handed it back to him in the morning without giving it a second thought. But I picked it up anyway. I read slowly. I've never been a fast reader, and I've never been the kind of man who skims something when it might matter. The messages were from earlier that same week. Derek writing to a couple of cousins on his mother's side, and a friend I vaguely remembered from his college years. What stopped me cold? What made my hand go absolutely still around that phone? "Just let the old man think he still matters. Won't be long now." I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it the first time. I understood it perfectly the first time, but because I wanted to be certain I wasn't misreading it, wasn't inserting some meaning that wasn't there, wasn't making the mistake of a father who expects the worst from his son and goes looking for it whether it's real or not. It was real. It was right there on the screen in his own handwriting, so to speak. I set the phone back down on the shelf, face down this time. I sat with my hands on my knees and stared at the concrete floor for a long, long while. The bulb hummed overhead. Outside, somewhere on Crenshaw Avenue, a car rolled slowly past, its headlights sweeping briefly across the little window near the ceiling. Just let the old man think he still matters. I'd never thought of myself as a naive man. 30 years in a trade that requires you to look at problems clearly and fix them practically doesn't leave a lot of room for sentimentality about pipes and joints, and what happens when you ignore a slow leak long enough to let it rot the wood behind the wall. But somewhere between being a father and being a fool, I'd let myself believe that whatever Derek's faults were, and I was never blind to his faults, the foundation underneath them was still solid. That message told me the foundation had been gone a long time. I just hadn't looked closely enough to see it. I picked up my own phone and called Frank Ruiz. Frank and I had known each other 39 years by then. Since we were young men working construction sites out across the San Fernando Valley. Him doing electrical, me doing plumbing, two guys from working families trying to build something that would actually hold up. He'd sat with me at the hospital the night Carol died. He'd shown up at my door the following Saturday with a cooler of beer, a folding chair, and absolutely nothing to say for 2 hours, which turned out to be exactly the right thing to do. If there was one man in this world I could call at 11:30 on a Friday. He picked up on the second ring. "Walter, everything okay?" "No," I said. "Not really." I heard him mute the television. "Talk to me." "That boy," Frank said finally and stopped there. "Yeah," I said. "Walter, I've been meaning to tell you something." His voice changed, got more deliberate. "You remember that mountain property I mentioned back in the spring? That condo up in the Santa Monica Mountains? The one my neighbor's brother-in-law was trying to sell?" I remembered. He brought it up over coffee back in April, and I'd half listened the way you have. Listen to something that seems like it belongs to a completely different version of your life. "I remember," I said. "It's still available," Frank said. "Walter, I think you should go see it tomorrow." I looked at the concrete floor. I looked at the yellow bulb, at the shelf where Derek's phone sat face down in the dark. "Yeah," I said. "I want you to remember that condo, because it's going to matter a lot more than either of us understood on that phone call. But before I get there, there's a card I need to cancel, and a son who's about to find out, for the first time in his life, what the word no actually sounds like coming out of my mouth." I got up carefully, the way men my age get up when they don't want to announce themselves to their own joints. I folded the blanket. I made coffee. Not for anyone but myself. Standing at the counter while it brewed, I looked out at the backyard through the kitchen window. I poured my coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the banking app on my phone. The supplemental card. That's what the bank had called it 8 years earlier, when I'd added Derek to my account during a stretch when he was between jobs and needed something to hold him over. Then I switched screens, and there it was. $310. I switched back to the account management screen and found the supplemental card. I pressed cancel. The app asked me to confirm. I confirmed. Supplemental card ending in 4071 has been deactivated. The cardholder will be notified. I set the phone face down on the table and drank my coffee. "Is there any coffee left?" "In the pot," I said. He poured himself a cup, leaned against the counter, and scrolled through his phone with his thumb. I looked at him. "No," I said. He looked up then. "What?" "Well, no," I said again. "I'm going out this morning." His expression shifted from mild irritation to something sharper. "Dad, it's a 15-minute drive. She just wants eggs and fruit, maybe some pastries from the place on Figueroa." "Then she can go get them," I said. "Or you can." He stared at me for a second, mouth slightly open, the look of a man who just walked into an obstacle where he expected a perfectly clear road. Then he pushed off the counter, grabbed his keys off the hook by the door and said, "Fine." I finished my coffee. I washed my mug, set it in the rack. I changed into clean clothes in the storage room, and I was ready to go when Frank's truck pulled up outside at 8:54. I was almost to the front door when I heard it. Derek's voice out in the driveway, loud enough to cut through the walls. "What do you mean it's declined?" A pause. "Run it again." Another pause, longer this time. And when he spoke again, all the confidence had drained straight out of his voice, replaced with something thin and almost frightened. "That's not possible. Run it one more time." I opened the front door. Derek was standing beside his car in the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, his face the exact color of a man who has just discovered the ground under his feet isn't nearly as solid as he thought it was. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Have a good morning, Derek," I said. I walked past him to Frank's truck, climbed into the passenger seat, and didn't look back. "Ready?" Frank asked. "More than ready," I said. He pulled away from the curb, and I did not turn around to watch my son standing there in the driveway with a dead card, an empty coffee cup, and the very first slow understanding that something in his life had just changed for good. Frank drove the way he always drove. Frank was 66, 2 years younger than me, with the broad shoulders of a man who'd spent 4 decades pulling wire through walls and the particular ease of someone who never once in his life pretended to be anything other than exactly what he was. He didn't ask how I was feeling. "Agent's name is Patterson," he said, merging onto the 10 West. "Met him through my neighbor's brother-in-law last spring, straightforward. Doesn't oversell. The property's been sitting because the owner wants cash and most buyers don't come with cash in hand. How much? 265, Frank said. Bedroom condo, third floor, end unit. The view's the thing, Walter. I don't even want to describe it. I want you to see it yourself. I nodded and looked out the window. The freeway was already filling up, even at that hour, Saturday morning traffic in a city that never fully stops moving, and I watched the neighborhoods change as we pushed west. The dense commercial stretches of East La gave way to Culver City, and then we climbed north into the hills, where the houses thinned out and the trees started to matter more than the signage did. Patterson was waiting in the small parking area when we pulled in. Trim, in his 50s, a firm handshake, and the unhurried manner of a man who understood that certain decisions can't be rushed, and didn't try to rush this one. "Mr. Hines," he said, "good to meet you. Frank told me a little about your situation." "Just looking this morning," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but felt like the right thing to say until I knew more. The building was 3 stories, Spanish-style stucco with a terracotta roof, set back from a narrow road that wound up through oak trees and dry brush. It was quiet in the way places are quiet when they're genuinely far from the noise, rather than just insulated from it. I could hear birds. Patterson led us up to the 3rd floor and unlocked the end unit. The door opened into a living space with high ceilings and wide windows, and the first thing I saw through that glass was Los Angeles. All of it, or what felt like all of it, the whole basin spreading out below in the morning haze. I'd lived in that city for 68 years, and I had never once seen it from this angle. I wasn't really listening to him, not because he was saying anything wrong, but because I was standing at that window with my hands at my sides and something was happening in my chest. Frank came and stood beside me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked out the same window. "Well," he said finally. "Yeah," I said. I stepped out through the sliding door onto the balcony. The morning air up there was cooler, dry, and sharp with the smell of sage and oak, and the city below was just starting to catch the full light of the sun. Behind me, I heard Patterson ask Frank quietly, "Does he want a few minutes?" "He's fine," Frank said. "He's thinking." That was exactly right. I wasn't thinking about square footage or hoe fees or the logistics of a move. I was thinking about Carol years earlier on a Sunday drive through these very hills, telling me that she thought people who lived up high must see things differently, must have a different relationship with all the noise and hurry going on down below. I turned around and walked back inside. "Mr. Patterson," I said, "I'll take it." Patterson blinked once. "You'd like to schedule a second visit?" "No," I said. "I don't need a second visit. I have $310,000 in a savings account and I want to pay cash. How fast can we close?" Patterson looked at Frank. Frank looked up at the ceiling with the expression of a man trying very hard not to smile. "Cash transaction," Patterson said, recovering. "With clear title we could potentially close in 10 to 14 days. "Then let's start the paperwork today," I said. We spent 40 minutes at that kitchen table going through the initial documents. I signed where Patterson pointed and initialed where he told me to. When it was done and he'd stepped outside to make some calls, Frank leaned back in his chair and looked at me across the empty table. "How do you feel?" he asked, which was unlike him. "Like I can breathe," I said. Frank nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "It's about time." On the way down the mountain, I took out my phone and sent a text to my grandson. Owen, Sanders' boy, 19 years old, and the only member of my family who'd called me on my birthday the year before without needing to be reminded. "Can you come by this week? I need to tell you something." His reply came before we even reached the bottom of the hill. "Of course, Grandpa. Everything okay?" I looked at that question for a long moment. Then I typed back, "It's going to be," and it was going to be, but only because I was about to walk into an office with a good coffee maker and a lawyer named Ray Connors and find out exactly how much power my paperwork actually gave me. Ray was 63, a slender man who wore his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead most of the time, and he had a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the building without ever seeming to perform it. We'd met at St. Agatha's, a parish in the Adams district where I'd been going on and off for 30 years, where Carol and I had married, where we'd buried her. Ray had been a member there since his own wife passed in 2018. He'd handled Carol's estate, carefully, thoroughly, and for less money than he probably should have charged. "Sit down, Walter," he said when I came in, already reaching for the coffee pot. "You sounded serious on the phone." "I am serious," I said. I sat across from his desk and took the coffee he handed me. Then I told him everything. The dinner, the words at the table, the message in the group chat, the supplemental card, the condo up in the Santa Monica Mountains. "Does Derek know any of this?" he asked. "The savings, the condo, any of it?" "No," I said, "and I want to keep it that way until everything's done." Ray nodded slowly. "I have the original documents in a fireproof box in the storage room," I said. "She was right that it was your home," Ray said. "And she was right that the paper is what matters legally. In California, property acquired before marriage is separate property. Derek has no legal claim on that house, and he cannot contest a sale." Something loosened in my chest when he said that. Not dramatically, not the way things loosen in the movies, but in that small, practical way tension releases when you finally get a clear answer to a question you've been carrying around for days without quite knowing it. "I want to list it," I said. "I'll connect you with a good agent," Ray said. "I know someone who works East La Properties, honest, no games." "The will," I said. "The will," he confirmed. He opened a folder on his desk that he'd apparently prepared after my call that morning. "I want to change that," I said. "I want Owen to receive the primary share, 60%. Sandra gets 30. Ray looked up from the folder. "You want a no contest clause?" "I want a no contest clause. Explain to me exactly how that works." "California enforces no contest clauses," Ray said, leaning forward slightly, the way he did when he wanted to make sure I understood something precisely. "That's fine," I said. "It's a significant incentive not to file," Ray said. "Assuming Derek has any legal counsel worth the name, they'll tell him exactly that." "I am clearly of sound mind," I said. Ray almost smiled. "That is my professional assessment as well." We spent the next 40 minutes going through the documentation. Ray explained each section before I signed it, the way a man explains something when he genuinely wants you to understand it, rather than rushing past the complicated parts. That last one sat with me for a moment. "The old Poe," I said. "The one Derek has, it's revoked as of today?" "He'll receive formal notification by mail within 3 business days," Ray said. "In the meantime, I'd suggest contacting your bank and your insurance provider directly to flag any recent changes made under that authorization." I thought about what Frank had said on the phone that Saturday afternoon, the thing he'd been meaning to tell me. "I'll do that today," I said. When I stood to leave, Ray walked me to the door himself, which he didn't always do. At the threshold, he paused and looked at me with the straightforward concern of a man who never dressed things up more than they needed to be. "Walter," he said, "you're doing the right thing." "I know," I said. My phone buzzed just as I reached the elevator. A text from Frank. "Walter, call me now. I want you to sit with those 4 words the way I had to sit with them, because they were about to introduce me to a piece of this story I hadn't even imagined yet, something buried 8 months deep. Come back for part 6. I was still in the elevator when I called him back. The doors hadn't even fully closed, and I was already pressing his name on my screen, my thumb moving faster than the calm I'd been trying to perform all morning. 4 words in a text from Frank Ruiz meant something. Frank was not a man who sent urgent messages about nothing. In 39 years, I'd gotten exactly 2 texts from him that carried that particular tone, and both of them had been about things that genuinely mattered. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Where are you?" "Elevator. Ray's building." "What happened?" "You need to sit down for this, Walter." "Okay." I heard him exhale on his end. "You remember my neighbor Frank Reyes, the one on the corner with the brown truck? His brother, in-law, works at Pacific Life." He paused. "Your insurance company, Walter." He wasn't going to say anything because of privacy rules, but he told me enough to tell you. Call them directly today, right now, before you do anything else. "Tell me," I said. "About 8 months ago," Frank said, "someone used a power of attorney document to request a beneficiary change on your life insurance policy. The primary beneficiary was changed from Owen to Derek." The lobby was cool and quiet around me. A woman in a gray suit walked past with a coffee cup. A man held the door for someone behind him. "Say that again," I said, even though I'd heard every word. "8 months ago," Frank repeated, his voice careful and even, the voice of a man delivering something painful and doing it as cleanly as he could, because that's the kindest way to do it. "Someone presented a POA document at Pacific Life and changed your primary beneficiary from Owen to Derek. Due $20,000. I'd taken out that policy in 2001 when Derek was 10 years old." right around the time Carol was diagnosed with the illness that would eventually take her 14 years later. Someone had quietly changed it back to Derek, 8 months earlier, while I was still living in that same house, cooking dinners, lending my car, saying yes to every small request because that was what I had always done. My hands were not steady. I want to be honest about that. They were resting on my knees and shaking with a fine, continuous tremor I couldn't stop just by pressing them flat against my legs. I pressed them flat anyway and breathed through it. "The old POA," I said. "The one I signed after Carol died." "That's what it sounds like," Frank said. "Walter," Frank said, "you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "Ray just revoked the PO, as of this morning." "Good. But you need to call Pacific Life directly and report the unauthorized change. Tell them the PO has been revoked, and you want the beneficiary restored to Owen immediately. They'll flag the account and walk you through it. Don't let this sit." I stood up from the chair. My legs held. That was something. "I'm calling them right now," I said. "Yeah? Did he know what he was doing when he changed it?" Frank was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet I heard everything he wasn't saying. All the careful consideration of a man who'd watched me raise Derek from a distance for 30 years and had his own thoughts about what he'd observed. "Walter," he said finally, "a man doesn't file paperwork with an insurance company by accident." I ended the call and sat back down, not because my legs had given out, but because I needed 60 seconds to let what Frank had just said settle into its proper place inside me. I'd spent the last 3 days recalibrating my whole understanding of my son, moving it in increments from what I'd believed to what the evidence was actually showing me. The group chat message had been one thing. A man saying something cruel in private is painful, but not entirely surprising. People say things under pressure they don't fully mean, especially when they're performing for an audience. But you don't file paperwork with an insurance company by accident. You don't present a legal document, sign your name, walk away, and simply forget about it. That takes intent. That takes looking at a policy worth $20,000 and deciding deliberately to move it. I thought about Owen, 19 years old, working part-time, studying business at Cal State. I picked up the phone and called Pacific Life. The representative who answered was professional and unhurried. I explained the situation clearly, my policy number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, and told her. She asked me to hold. She came back after 4 minutes. "Send it to my email," I said. "I want it today." "Absolutely. Is there anything else I can help you with?" I looked out through the glass lobby doors at the ordinary Monday afternoon passing by outside, with no idea at all what had just happened inside this chair, this lobby, this body that had worked hard for 68 years and was only now beginning to understand exactly what all of that work had actually been for. "No," I said. "That's everything." I forwarded the insurance company's email to Ray the moment it arrived, with a single line attached. "Add this to the file." Then I sat for another moment, looking at nothing in particular, and let the anger move through me the way weather moves, not fighting it, just letting it pass, until what was left underneath was something harder and far more useful. Then I stood up, walked out into the afternoon, and drove home. What I found waiting for me in the front yard 2 days later was worse than anything I'd imagined on that lobby chair. My dead wife's belongings, out on folding tables, price tags already attached. I saw it from half a block away. I'd been out since 7 that morning, driving to the UP store to ship a certified copy of the insurance correction form to Pacific Life's processing center because Ray had told me to send a physical copy in addition to the electronic one. When Ray tells you to do something like that, you do it. 2 folding tables set up on the front lawn. Boxes lined along the driveway. I pulled the truck to the curb and sat there for a moment with the engine running. On the nearest table I could see my tools. My tools, the set of pipe wrenches I'd carried in my work truck for 22 years, the ones with the orange handles Carol had given me one Christmas as a joke gift because she said I talked about pipe wrenches the way other men talk about golf clubs. A level. 2 sets of channel, lock pliers, a voltage tester Frank had given me the day I retired, engraved on the handle with the words "last job." Vanessa was standing near the far table in a white linen top and sunglasses, chatting with a woman I didn't recognize who was turning one of Carol's ceramic mixing bowls over in her hands. I turned off the engine. I walked toward the table slowly, not because I was trying to look calm, but because my legs had gone strange underneath me. The wooden box was there. A small cedar box about the size of a shoebox, with a simple brass latch on the front. I'd made it myself in 1994, in the garage, on a Saturday afternoon while Derek, 7 years old at the time, handed me sandpaper and asked questions about everything under the sun. I picked the box up off the table. My hands were shaking, and this time I didn't try to stop them. "Oh, Walter," Vanessa appeared at my elbow, her voice carrying that particular brightness of someone who's been caught doing something and is hoping cheerfulness will paper over it. "I was going to mention this to you. We're just doing a little decluttering, getting the house organized. You know how it is when you're settling in." I looked at her. I looked at the box in my hands. I looked back at her. "This box," I said, and my voice came out lower than I meant it to, rougher. "Of course," she said quickly. "Of course, if there are things that have sentimental value, we can absolutely set those aside. I just assumed, since everything was in storage." "This was in storage," I said. Vanessa opened her mouth and closed it again. She walked to the low fence between our properties and looked at the tables. "Walter," she said. "Morning, Dolores," I said. She looked at the yard sale setup again, taking it in the way a woman of 72 who has seen a great deal of life takes in something that doesn't require an explanation. Her jaw tightened. She shook her head once, small and precise, the kind of motion that carries a whole verdict inside it. "You need anything," she said, "you come over." "I know," I said. "Thank you." I turned back toward the house. The cedar box held against my chest with both arms, the way you carry something that has no replacement anywhere in the world. Vanessa called something after me about the other items on the table, something about being reasonable. I walked through the front door, through the living room, down the hall to the storage room, and set the box on the shelf where it belonged. I stood there with my hand resting on top of it for a long time. Then I took out my phone and sent a message to Owen. "Bring your truck on Saturday. I have things to move." His reply came in under a minute, the way his replies always came, with the immediacy of someone who understood that when I asked for something, it was never casual. "I'll be there at 8, Grandpa. Whatever you need." I put the phone in my pocket. I looked at the cedar box on the shelf. I thought about Carol laughing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands, watching me sand the edges of a table I was building for the two of us. "Whatever you need." I was beginning, for the first time in a long while, to understand what that phrase actually meant when it was pointed at me instead of away from me. The yard sale wasn't the last insult. That same afternoon, Vanessa knocked on the storage room door with an apology in her mouth and a bill in her purse. She knocked at 2:15 that afternoon, not the sharp, impatient rap Derek used when he wanted something, the one that landed on doors like a small demand. This was different. 3 gentle taps, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that had been practiced until it sounded spontaneous. I was sitting on the edge of the cot in the storage room, the cedar box in my lap, not opening it, just resting my hands on the lid, the way you rest your hands on something you're grateful still exists. Vanessa stood in the hallway in a different outfit than she'd worn that morning. "Walter," she said warmly, as though the morning hadn't happened, as though she hadn't been standing in my front yard 2 hours earlier selling my dead wife's mixing bowls to a stranger. "All right. I feel terrible about this morning." Her voice took on a softer note. "I genuinely didn't know those things meant so much to you. I should have asked." She said it the way people say, "sorry," when what they mean is, "I'm sorry, this is causing a problem for me." "Thank you," I said, because acknowledging an apology costs nothing and reveals nothing. "I want to make it up to you," she said, and here her voice shifted into something softer, almost conspiratorial, the tone of someone sharing a pleasant secret. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the insurance policy. I thought about the message in the group chat. I thought about the cedar box on the shelf behind me, Carol's bracelet, the hospital bracelet, the letter written on yellow paper when I was young. "All right," I said. "Give me 10 minutes. The montage was everything Beverly Hills understood itself to be. Marble floors, staff in matching uniforms who spoke just above a whisper. The smell of eucalyptus mixed with something else, something expensive and subtle that probably had a French name attached to it somewhere. The treatments themselves, I won't pretend, were unpleasant. Afterward, Vanessa and I sat in the relaxation lounge in our robes, 2 glasses of cucumber water on the table between us. She was talking about her facial, about a specific product the esthetician had used, and I was listening with whatever portion of my attention could be spared when she reached across the table and picked up a small leather folder that a staff member had quietly left there. She opened it. She looked at it. Then she slid it across the table toward me with one finger, the way you pass something to someone when you want the whole gesture to look casual. The total was 840. They really outdid themselves today. I picked up the folder. I looked at the total. I set it back down on the table between us and folded my hands on top of my robe. "Vanessa," I said. She was still looking toward the window. "You said this was your treat." She turned back with an expression of mild surprise, as though she'd genuinely forgotten the specific words she'd used 2 hours earlier. "No," I said. The word landed in that room and stayed there. From the corner of my eye, I could see the young woman at the reception desk look up from her computer. A staff member near the door went very still. "I'm not paying for this," I said, at a volume that was perfectly conversational and could still be heard clearly by everyone within 15 feet. Vanessa's face moved through several expressions in rapid succession, the way a card player's face moves when they realize the hand they were holding wasn't what they thought it was. The warmth drained first, then the composure cracked slightly along the edges, a tightening around the eyes. "That's very embarrassing, Walter," she said, in a low voice. "Yes?" I stood up, collected my monogram bag with my own clothes inside, and walked to the changing room with my back straight and my shoulders level. I changed, folded the robe, set the slippers on top of it, the way the sign on the wall instructed, and walked out to the lobby. It took Vanessa 11 minutes to come out. She didn't speak during the drive home. I didn't ask her to. When we pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed against my leg. A message from Greg Torres. "Mr. Hines, we have our first showing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10,000. Buyers look serious." I read the message twice. The house showing wasn't the moment that broke me open. It was the word Derek used to describe me to his future in-laws in front of the whole family. Part 9 has the handyman line, and it's the moment even Dolores Reyes couldn't stay quiet. Derek's text came Thursday evening while I was eating dinner alone at the kitchen table. "House needs to look good tomorrow. Vanessa's parents are coming at 4. Make sure everything is clean." I read it twice, not because the meaning was unclear, but because I wanted to be certain I understood the tone correctly. I set the phone face down and finished my soup. I'd spent that Thursday morning with Greg Torres, walking through the house while Derek and Vanessa were both out. Greg was a compact man in his late 40s with quick eyes and a yellow legal pad, and he moved through each room making notes with the efficient thoroughness of someone who'd done this thousands of times and still took every one of them seriously. He told me the house was in excellent structural condition, that the kitchen and bathrooms were dated but clean. "I'd list at 425, he said at the end of the walkthrough, standing in the backyard near Carol's lemon tree. "You might get 450 if the first buyers are motivated." "List it," I said. The listing had gone live Thursday afternoon. I knew because Greg sent me the link, and I'd opened it on my phone and looked at photographs of my own house, the rooms I'd painted and repainted over 3 decades, the kitchen where Carol had taught Derek to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, the backyard where I built him a wooden sandbox in 1994 that eventually became a garden bed once he outgrew it. The photographs made the house look like something someone else already lived in, which I suppose was accurate. Now, Friday at 4,000, I was sitting in the backyard with a glass of iced tea when I heard the cars arrive out front. I stayed put for a few minutes, listening to voices at the door, the particular register of social performance people use when they're meeting family they want to impress. Gerald Croft was not what I'd expected. I built a picture of him in my head from the fragments Derek and Vanessa had dropped over the months. Beverly Hills restaurant chain, old money, the kind of man who wears his wealth the way some men wear cologne. Derek stood in the middle of the room, slightly flushed, talking too fast. The way he did when he was nervous and trying not to show it, he dressed carefully. I said hello to Gerald and Margaret. I shook Gerald's hand. It was the handshake of a man who'd spent his entire adult life doing business with people. Then Derek said it. He said it the way people say things they've been thinking for a while, long enough that it doesn't even occur to them anymore that the thing shouldn't be said out loud. "Don't mind him," Derek said. "He's the handyman. He helps around the house." The room didn't go quiet so much as it went still. Gerald Croft looked at me. Margaret Croft looked at Derek. He'd just answered the question for me himself. From the front yard came the sound of a screen door, and then footsteps on the porch. Dolores Reyes appeared in the open doorway with the unhurried authority of a woman who'd been watching this neighborhood for 50 years. She looked at Gerald Croft. She looked at Derek. She looked at me. That man, she said, and her voice was the voice of someone who had already decided exactly what needed to be said, and was going to say it without any decoration at all. Raised that boy alone for 30 years. Built this house with his own 2 hands. Fixed half the pipes on this street when people couldn't pay him a dime for it. Don't you let anybody in this room tell you different. She held Gerald Croft's gaze for a moment. He held hers back, with the expression of a man reassessing several things at once. Gerald Croft cleared his throat. He looked at Derek, and every trace of the warmth he'd been carrying 2 minutes earlier was gone from his face. Is that true? He asked. Did your father build this house? Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. Renovated it, I said pleasantly, because the truth was worth stating accurately. Original structure was here. Gerald looked at Derek for another long moment. Then he looked at me. That's real work, he said quietly. That evening, after the Crofts had left, and Derek and Vanessa had retreated upstairs with the contained, pressurized quality of people who had a great deal to say to each other and were waiting until they were alone to say it, my phone rang. Grandpa, he said, and he sounded careful in the way young people sound when they've heard something that worries them. Dad called me tonight. He was asking about your savings account, whether I knew how much you had in it. I stood in the kitchen where I'd made 10,000 meals and looked at the lemon tree through the window. I know, I said. Thank you, Owen. Is everything going to be okay? Yes, I said, and I meant it. The next morning, I found out somebody had used my own name to raise money online, with a made-up story and a photograph of me I'd never even posed for. Part 10 is where the GoFundMe page comes into this story, and it's the part that finally made a neighbor named Patricia pick up the phone. The first call came at 8:14 in the morning. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee and the Monday edition of the Law Times, which I still received in print because Carol had subscribed back in 1997 and I'd never gotten around to canceling it. And then at some point it turned into the kind of thing you don't cancel, because it's one of the last threads connecting the morning to what mornings used to feel like. The number on the screen wasn't one I recognized. A 323 area code. Local, I answered. Walter? A woman's voice, uncertain, the voice of someone who wasn't sure they had the right number. Walter Hines speaking. This is Patricia Mendez from down on 62nd Street. We met at the block party a few years back. I used to see your wife in her garden. I remembered her, vaguely, a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, who'd brought a pasta salad to the block party and stayed until the very end helping clean up. I remember, I said. Good morning, Patricia. Walter, I'm calling because I saw something online this morning, and I wasn't sure if you knew about it. She paused, and in that pause, I could hear her choosing her words carefully. I set my coffee cup down. What kind of page? I asked, though something in my stomach already knew. It says you lost your pension, Patricia said. It says you're elderly and struggling, and that you might lose your home. It's asking people to donate. I thanked her. I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table for approximately 4 seconds before Dolores came through the back door without knocking, which she'd been doing for 25 years and which I had never once minded, holding her phone out toward me, screen facing forward. Tell me you already know about this, she said. The description beneath the photograph read, my father worked his whole life as a laborer and recently lost his pension due to company restructuring. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, slowly, the way you read something when you're trying to understand not just what it says, but what it required from the person who wrote it. $2,000 in what looked like 4 days, based on the timestamp at the top of the page. Walter. Dolores stood at the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her jaw set in exactly the way it had been set 2 days earlier in the living room, when Derek called me the handyman. I know, I said. I know exactly what it is. I handed her phone back and picked up my own. I opened GoFundMe and found the page in under a minute using my own name as the search term. A strange experience, searching for yourself and finding a version of yourself somebody else had invented. I typed, this campaign uses my name, photograph, and false information without my knowledge or consent. I submitted the report. I took screenshots of the page, the donation total, the timestamp, the description, the photograph. I sent all of it to Ray Connors with a message, new item for the file, GoFundMe in my name, fraudulent already reported, screenshots attached. I hadn't planned to. Dolores had poured herself a cup of coffee from my pot, which she also did without asking, and sat across the table from me with the expression of a woman who intended to stay until she was satisfied. I wasn't going to do something rash. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about Patricia Mendez on 62nd Street, who had almost donated to a page designed to take money from her. I thought about whoever else had seen it, people from church, maybe, people from the neighborhood, people who had known Carol and thought they were helping her husband. "Nothing," I said. "Not yet." Dolores looked at me over the rim of her cup. Dolores was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Carol always said you were the most patient man she ever met. Said it drove her crazy sometimes." Something pulled tight in my chest. "She wasn't wrong," I said. "She also said," Dolores continued, setting her cup down, "that when you finally decided something, nothing on this earth was going to change it." I looked at the lemon tree through the kitchen window. The morning light came through the leaves the way it did in August, gold and specific, the kind of light that makes everything look exactly like it's supposed to be where it is. "She wasn't wrong about that either," I said. The following night, my son knocked on the storage room door at 10:47 with an apology I'd been waiting 11 days to hear. The knock came at 10:47 at night. I know the exact time because I just checked my phone to see whether Ray had responded to a follow-up I'd sent him earlier that afternoon. Confirmation from the insurance company that the beneficiary restoration was moving forward. He hadn't responded yet, which was fine. Ray worked on Ray's schedule, and that schedule had never once failed to include everything that needed, including Groud. 3 knocks. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped back from the door. He came in and sat on the edge of the cot, which was the only place to sit, and I stood near the shelf with the cedar box and looked at my son in the yellow light of the bare bulb. "Dad," he said. He looked at the glass of water in his hand. "I owe you an apology. All right?" "What I said at dinner," he kept going. "The way I talked to you, that was wrong. I know it was wrong. I've been thinking about it every day since." He paused. He delivered it well. I'll give him that. The pacing was right. If I'd heard this speech 11 days earlier, before the phone screen in the storage room, before Pacific Life, before the GoFundMe page with my photograph and my invented destitution, I might have felt something shift in me toward him. So I stood near the shelf with my hands at my sides and I listened to the rest of it. "I know I haven't always made things easy," he said. "I know I lean on you more than I should, but you're my dad, and I don't want things to be like this between us." He finally looked up from the glass. "If there's anything I can do to fix this, I want to do it." He held the look a moment longer than natural. There it was. Not in the words themselves, which were carefully chosen, but in that held look. The slight forward lean of his posture, the fact that he'd come at 10:47 at night rather than 10:47 in the morning. "Derek," I said. Yeah. When did the GoFundMe page go down?" His expression didn't collapse. I'd half expected it might, but it didn't. Instead, it went through a rapid, practiced recalibration. The kind that told me this wasn't the first time in his life he'd been caught at something and had to adjust mid-sentence. "What?" he said. "The fundraising page," I said, "with my photograph and my name. The one that said I'd lost my pension. When did it come down?" "A beat." "2 beats. I don't know what you're talking about," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. He held the look back, which required real effort. I could see the effort, the slight tension in his jaw, the deliberate steadiness of his eyes. "Derek," I said quietly, "you're not sorry for what you said at that dinner table. You're not sorry for what you did with the power of attorney. You're not sorry for the photograph you posted on the internet with a story you invented about my life." I paused. The color left his face, not gradually, quickly. The way color leaves when the body understands, before the mind does, that the ground has shifted underneath it. "Dad, I'm not angry," I said, and this was true, which was perhaps the strangest part of the whole night. "I'm not angry at you, Derek. I'm something else entirely. I'm finished." He stood up from the cot. The glass of water shook slightly in his hand. "What does that mean? What does finished mean?" "It means," I said, "that I've made decisions about my life that you're going to find out about soon enough, and there is nothing you can say tonight that's going to change them." "Dad, please." "Good night, Derek," I said. He stood there another moment, the glass still shaking in his hand. Then he turned and walked out of the room, and I listened to his footsteps move down the hall, up the stairs, and into the room that had been mine for 30 years. I sat down on the edge of the cot. I opened the forwarded email. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the cot beside me and sat in the yellow light of the storage room for a long time, listening to the house settle around me the way it had settled around me every night for 31 years. All its familiar sounds, the creak of the third stair, the particular click of the hallway baseboard when the temperature dropped. I had built this house into what it was. I had every right to decide what came next for it. I picked the phone back up and typed 3 words to Greg Torres. Call me tomorrow. The next morning, I said yes to full asking price without even asking for a counter, and then I loaded up a rented storage unit with everything that actually mattered, one box at a time, with the help of the only person in that whole family who never once made me question whether I was doing the right thing. Part 12 is about Owen. Greg Torres answered on the first ring. It was 7:33 in the morning, Wednesday, and I was standing in the backyard with my coffee looking at Carol's lemon tree the way I'd been looking at it more than usual lately. Like I was trying to memorize something I already knew by heart. "Mr. Hines," Greg said, "I was hoping you'd call early. Tell me about the buyers." "Young couple," Greg said. "He's an engineer at GL. She's a nurse at Cedars. They've been looking for 8 months. Lost 2 offers to cash buyers, and this time they came back with cash themselves. Every dollar of it." He paused. "They have a 6-month-old, Mr. Hines. They want this house, not a house like it." I looked at the lemon tree. Carol had planted it on a Saturday in March of 2003, and I'd stood in almost that exact spot, holding the root ball while she dug the hole to the depth she wanted, which took 4 tries, because she was particular about things being done right the first time. "Tell them yes," I said. "Full acceptance? No counter?" "Full acceptance," I said. "They're paying what I'm asking, and they're paying cash. What else would I counter for?" Greg laughed. A short, genuine laugh. 10 days. I turned the number over in my mind the way you turn a stone over in your hand, testing its weight. "Monday the 18th, I said. "I'll be there." He came around the back of the truck and shook my hand with a grip that was firm without trying to be impressive, which told me more about him than most conversations could have. "Grandpa," he said, "where do we start?" We started in the storage room, which was where I'd been living, and where the things that mattered most were already gathered by proximity, if not by intention. We worked through the morning in a comfortable rhythm, the kind that develops between people who don't need to fill silence with noise. Around 11, sitting on the tailgate of Owen's truck eating sandwiches I'd made that morning, Owen said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Go ahead. Did you know this was going to happen before that dinner? I mean, did you have a plan?" I thought about that honestly. "No," I said. "I had savings, and I had options, but I didn't have a plan until your uncle gave me a reason." Owen looked at me. "He gave you a reason to use what you already had." I looked at my grandson, 19 years old, eating a turkey sandwich in the August heat, and he just said, in one sentence, exactly what I'd been circling for 2 weeks without finding the precise words myself. "Exactly," I said. Owen nodded and took another bite of his sandwich. Then he said, "It landed without malice, the way true things land when the person saying them isn't trying to wound you, but simply can't see the point of saying anything other." "You're probably right," I said. "Not probably," Owen said. I laughed. It came up from somewhere I hadn't visited in a while, a genuine laugh, the kind that arrives without being planned. We made 2 trips to a storage unit I'd rented the previous week in Inglewood, a climate-controlled facility on La Cienega. On the second trip back, pulling onto Crenshaw Avenue, Owen said quietly, "I didn't look up at the house." "I know," I said. We unloaded the second batch, and Owen helped me lock the unit and pocket the key. Driving back, the truck bed empty, the August afternoon settling into early evening, Owen said, "Grandpa, for what it's worth, I think what you're doing is right." My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected. He nodded once, eyes on the road, and we drove the rest of the way in the comfortable silence of people who have said what needed saying and don't need to say it again. When I got back inside, I walked past the living room and noticed the top drawer of the small writing desk in the corner wasn't entirely closed. It had been closed when I'd left that morning. Monday, I thought. 2 more days. What Derek didn't understand yet was that Monday wasn't just a closing date. It was the day I sat him and Vanessa down at that same oak table and told them the whole truth at once. Part 13 is that dinner. It's the confrontation everything in this story has been building toward. I woke at 5:30 without an alarm. I stood in front of the mirror above the sink and looked at myself for a long moment, 68 years old, gray at the temples and all the way through now, the last of the brown having surrendered sometime in the years after Carol died, lines around the eyes, around the mouth, the hands of a man who'd spent 4 decades working with those hands and never once been sorry for it. I dressed carefully. Dark slacks, a white button-down shirt I'd ironed the night before, the gray sport coat Carol had picked out for me at Macy's back in 2019 for our anniversary dinner that year, which we hadn't ended up going to because she'd had a bad week, one of the bad weeks toward the end, and we'd eaten at home instead, with candles on the kitchen table. I'd worn the jacket once since then, to raise office for Carol's estate paperwork. I looked at myself in the small mirror on the back of the storage room door. "Ready?" he asked. "Been ready," I said. The title company's office sat on Figueroa Street downtown, clean, modern glass walls, a conference room that smelled like fresh coffee and new carpet. "Yes," I said, "it is." We were shown into the conference room. The closing agent, a woman named Patricia Lynn who wore reading glasses on a cord around her neck, arranged the documents into neat stacks with the unhurried competence of someone who had guided hundreds of people through exactly this process. Marcus Webb and his wife arrived 3 minutes later. Marcus Webb extended his hand across the table. "Mr. Hines, thank you for accepting our offer." "Thank you for making it," I said. Denise Webb smiled at me over her daughter's sleeping head. Something moved through my chest at that. Carol's lemon tree, the one she'd planted on a Saturday in March while I held the root ball. It was going to belong to a family again. "She'll like it," I said, nodding at the sleeping baby, "when she's older." Patricia Lynn walked us through each document with methodical clarity, explaining each section before I signed it. I signed my name, Walter James Hines, the same cursive I'd learned in 3rd grade and never abandoned, 23 times across the various pages. When it was done, she gathered the executed copies and stepped out to make certified duplicates. Frank, who'd been sitting against the wall in the chair reserved for non-participants, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Marcus and Denise had stepped into the hallway with the baby, giving us a moment, which was a kind thing to do that I hadn't expected. "Like something's over," I said, "and like something else is just starting." Frank nodded slowly. Patricia Lynn came back in with Greg Torres and set a cashier's check on the table in front of me, sliding it across with 2 fingers. 42,800. I'd built something, and here was what it was worth in the language the world uses to measure such things. Frank stood and put his hand on my shoulder, brief and firm, and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Marcus Webb came back in, and we shook hands again at the door. I looked at him. 34 years old, engineer at GPL, wife in a yellow dress, baby asleep against her chest. The same age Derek had been, clipping his words at people, learning to perform his way through rooms. "I know you will," I said. "That's why I picked you." Marcus Webb smiled, and it was the smile of a man who understood exactly what that sentence had cost to say, which made me think he was going to be fine, and the house was going to be fine, and the lemon tree Carol had planted was going to be fine. Outside on Figueroa, Frank walked beside me to the truck. We stood on the sidewalk with the city moving around us. Los Angeles on a Monday, everyone going somewhere. "Lunch," Frank said. "Yeah," I said, "somewhere good." Frank almost smiled. "I know a place." I got into the truck with the cashier's check in the inside pocket of Carol's anniversary jacket, close against my chest, and looked out the windshield at the street. Tonight. Both cars were still in the driveway when I pulled in that evening at 612. Derek's Nissan and Vanessa's Audi, side by side, in the space that used to hold my work truck and Carol's old Camry. I sat in my own truck for a moment, engine off, looking at the house through the windshield, porch light on, blue-white television glow in the living room window. I reached into the inside pocket of Carol's jacket and touched the cashier's check. Still there. Then I got out, walked up the porch steps, and went inside. Derek was on the couch with his laptop open. Vanessa was in the armchair scrolling on her phone. They both looked up when I came in. I set my folder of documents on the dining room table. "Derek," I said. "Vanessa, come sit down, please. I need to talk to you." Something in my voice must have registered, because Derek closed his laptop without arguing, and Vanessa set her phone face down on the armrest. They came to the table and sat across from me, side by side, and I sat down opposite them with my folder in front of me and my hands flat on the table. I looked at my son, 34 years old. I had loved that boy with everything I had. I still did. That hadn't changed, and it wasn't going to change. But love and enabling are different things, and I'd spent too many years using one word when I should have been using the other. I sold the house, I said. The room didn't go quiet so much as it stopped. Derek's face went through no expression at all for about 2 seconds, which was its own kind of expression. The face of a person whose brain has just received information it doesn't yet know how to process. What? He said. I sold the house, I said again. Same words, same tone. I signed the paperwork this morning. Derek's chair scraped back from the table. What are you talking about? You can't sell the house. I grew up here. Mom grew up here with us. You can't just… Vanessa stood up. Her face had gone the color of paper. Wait, she said, her voice stripped of all its careful modulation down to something raw and genuinely frightened. Wait, where are we supposed to go? We just moved in. We're getting married. You cannot do this. You have 10 days, I said. 10 days. Derek repeated it like the words were in a language he was translating in real time. 10 days to find somewhere to live, to pack everything, too. He stopped. His hands came down flat on the table, hard, and the sound of it bounced off the kitchen walls. I'm going to call a lawyer. I'm going to contest this. This is my home, too. It has never been your home, I said, keeping my voice level. Not cold, not cruel, simply accurate, the way you state a fact about a measurement or a material. This was my home. You lived here. There's a difference. And I think, somewhere underneath all of this, you've always known that. You're doing this because of the card, Derek said. His voice had dropped now, gotten quieter, which was somehow worse than the shouting. Because I said something at dinner that came out wrong. You're punishing me for one bad night. I looked at my son for a long moment. Derek, I said, I know about the power of attorney. I know what you changed on the insurance policy, and when you changed it, I know about the messages on your phone. I paused. And I know about the GoFundMe page with my photograph on it. The color left his face, the way it had left it in the storage room. The other night. Quickly. Dad, I'm not here to argue about any of it, I said. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to tell you what has already happened, because you deserve to know, and because I am not the kind of man who does things behind people's backs without eventually telling them directly. Vanessa pointed a shaking finger at me across the table. You are destroying our lives, she said. Your arrangements with your father, I said carefully, are between you and your father. They have nothing to do with this house. Something shifted in her expression when I said that. A flicker of something I couldn't quite name, gone before I could identify it. Derek was on his feet now, pacing the length of the dining room, hands in his hair. I watched him the way you watch weather, without trying to change it, just observing. This isn't happening, he said, to no one in particular. This cannot be happening. It is happening, I said. I stood up from the table, gathered my folder, and held it against my chest. I'd like you both to please be respectful of the property between now and the 25th. It belongs to the new owners as of this morning, in every sense that matters. I turned toward the hallway. Who are you? Derek's voice came from behind me, rough and unsteady. You are not my father. My father would never do this. I stopped. I turned around and looked at my son standing in the middle of the dining room, 34 years old, surrounded by the furniture and the walls and the table I had built. I felt the full weight of everything at once, the love and the grief in the 34 years and the hard, clear knowledge of what had to happen next. Your father, I said quietly, spent 34 years saying yes when he should have said no. I walked down the hallway and up the stairs, past the room that had been mine, past the room where Derek had slept as a boy, and into the storage room. I closed the door behind me. Then I picked up my phone and called Frank. He answered on the second ring. Done, I said. Good, Frank said. That was all either of us needed to say. I expected the house to feel like a battlefield the next morning. Instead, it felt like the eye of the storm, quiet, almost peaceful, right before everything else came crashing in from the outside. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in weeks. I noticed it coming out of the storage room at 6:45 the next morning, that particular stillness that belongs to a space where the tension has either resolved itself or relocated somewhere else entirely. Their coffee mugs sat unwashed in the sink. They'd left early and in a hurry. I washed the mugs anyway, not out of any obligation, but because I was the kind of man who washed mugs when he found them, and that wasn't going to change regardless of what else was changing around me. I made my own coffee, carried it out to the back porch, and sat in the old lawn chair, looking at Carol's lemon tree in the early morning light. 6 days, I thought. My phone rang at 7:22. Sandra. I've been expecting this call without quite knowing when it would come. Dad, she said. Good morning, Sandra. Derek called me last night. A pause. He was upset. I imagine he was, I said. Dad, a longer pause. I've been awake since 2 in the morning trying to figure out what to say, and I still don't know, so I'm just going to say what's true. I heard her take a breath that cost her something. Ty was at that dinner. You don't need to carry that, I said gently. I do, though, she said. It was my place to say something. You're my father, she paused. Honestly, I said, I am better than I have been in a long time. She was quiet. Then Derek said you sold the house. I did. He said you bought something, a condo, in the Santa Monica Mountains. Second floor, I said, balcony looking out over the whole city. The silence that followed was softer than the ones before it. That sounds like something Mom would have loved, she said. My chest pulled tight around those words in a way I hadn't braced for. Yeah, I said. It does. Can I visit? The question came out younger than she was, the way questions do when a person isn't entirely sure they have the right to ask. Anytime, I said. You will always have a room there. That has not changed, and it is not going to change. She made a sound, the particular controlled exhale of a woman who spends her professional life not crying in front of people, and can't always switch it off when she's finally allowed to. We talked another 20 minutes about smaller things, her work, a patient who'd made her laugh the week before, Owen's plans at the auto shop, the kind of conversation we hadn't had in years, unhurried, without an agenda, the kind that reminds you not everything in a family goes wrong all at once. After we hung up, I sat on the porch until the morning had fully warmed. At 9:30, Dolores came through the back gate with a covered plate. Empanadas, she said, as though it needed no further explanation, because it didn't. Eventually she said she'd heard shouting the night before. I told them. She nodded and pulled another piece off her empanada. Good, she said. I thanked her for what she'd said in the living room the week before. She waved off the thanks with a small sound and said she'd only said what was true, and somebody had to. We sat until the plate was empty. My phone buzzed. Derek, we found a place. Moving out Sunday. Don't expect a goodbye. I read it once, set the phone face down, and looked at the lemon tree. What I felt wasn't hurt. It was something quieter. The specific sadness of watching someone choose the smaller version of themselves when a larger one was right there waiting. Everything okay? Dolores asked. Yes, I said, and it was. Marcus Webb arrived at 9,000 sharp on the day of possession, in the same blue jacket he'd worn at the closing. Denise beside him with the baby against her chest, and a look on her face that was trying hard not to be too obviously the look of someone who couldn't quite believe this was finally real. I met them at the front door. Mr. Hines, Marcus said. It's yours now, I said, and stepped aside to let them in. I'd spent the previous 6 days in a state of deliberate calm, moving through the house with the focused efficiency of someone who's made peace with a decision and is simply now executing it. Derek and Vanessa had moved out Sunday. I was carrying my last bag out to the truck when the second car pulled up, a black Mercedes, Beverly Hills plates. Gerald looked at the house with the evaluating eye of a man who'd been promised something and had come to collect it. Gerald Croft looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Gerald. Can I help you? Marcus asked. Gerald turned to me slowly. Mr. Hines, he said, what is going on? I sold the house, I said, to Mr. and Mrs. Webb. Closing was the 18th, today's possession day. Derek told me, Gerald said carefully, that this property would be part of the wedding arrangements. Derek was mistaken, I said. At that moment, Vanessa's Audi turned onto the street. It slowed through the windshield. I could see her father's Mercedes, see Marcus in the doorway, see me on the front walk with my bag. The car stopped in the middle of the street for a full 3 seconds. Then Derek got out. Gerald Croft turned to his daughter. Vanessa, he said in the voice of a man who had built an entire business by being very clear about what he would and would not accept, we need to talk. Dolores was on her front porch. She caught my eye and gave me the small nod I had come to understand meant she'd seen everything she needed to see. I put my bag in the truck. I shook Marcus Webb's hand one final time through the driver's window. Take care of that lemon tree, I said. Yes, sir, he said. I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. 6 weeks earlier, I'd stood on a balcony in the Santa Monica Mountains and understood something about the rest of my life before I even knew all of what I'd have to go through to get there. Part 15 is where I finally arrive, and where you find out what happened to Derek after the wedding fell apart in his own driveway. Frank was waiting at the storage unit on La Cienega when I pulled in. His truck was already loaded with the last of the boxes we'd staged there the previous Saturday, the cedar box riding up front on the passenger seat where I'd asked him to put it. He was leaning against his door, drinking coffee from a thermos, and when he saw me pull in, he straightened up, poured a second cup into the thermos lid and held it out without a word. I took it. I drank it standing in the parking lot in the August heat. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Gerald Croft showed up with a lawyer," I said. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Derek invited him." "Derek invited him," I confirmed. Frank shook his head once, slowly. The way you shake your head at something that's both predictable and still somehow surprising. Then he unlocked his truck. We drove up through the city, Frank's truck ahead, mine behind, a two-vehicle convoy moving west and then north through Culver City, up into the hills. I'd made this drive once before, 6 weeks earlier, with Frank, and everything had looked different then. Halfway up the mountain road, my phone rang through the truck speakers. I looked at his name on the screen for 2 full rings. Then I answered, "Dad." His voice was raw, straight down to something I hadn't heard from him in a long time, something young and undefended. Gerald's ending the engagement. I kept my eyes on the road, on Frank's truck ahead of me, on the city dropping away behind us in the mirror. "Derek," I said, "I'm sorry that's happening to you." "Can you?" He stopped, started again. "Is there anything?" "No," I said, not harshly, just clearly. "There isn't, not right now." A long silence. Then, "Okay. Take care of yourself," I said. "That's what I need you to do." I ended the call. The old country station filled the cab. Outside, the oak trees thickened along the road, the city falling further behind with every curve, the air through the cracked window turning cooler, sharper, cleaner. Frank's brake lights came on as he slowed for the last turn before the building. I followed him in, and we parked side by side. We sat in our trucks a moment, engines off, windows down, the sound of wind in the oaks and nothing else. Frank got out first. He walked to my window and rested his forearm on the door. I looked up at the building, at the third-floor end unit, at the balcony where I'd stood 6 weeks earlier with my hands on the railing, understanding something about the rest of my life. "Like I'm home," I said. Frank nodded. "Then let's go inside." 3 months after that drive, I'd built something I hadn't expected. A routine, a peace, a family that was smaller but a great deal more honest than the one I'd started with. Part 16 is the end of this story. Stay for it. 3 months in, I had a routine. Up at 5:30, coffee on the balcony while the city below was still dark. Just the grid of lights stretching east toward the horizon. Millions of people not yet awake. Frank came up on Saturdays. We sat on the balcony and argued about baseball and ate whatever I'd cooked that morning, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Sandra visited in October with Owen. They stayed the weekend. Sandra sleeping in the second bedroom, Owen on the couch by choice, because he said the view from the living room window at night was too good to waste. Garrick's letter came in November. A real letter, handwritten, in an envelope addressed in the careful print of someone who'd slowed down enough to actually mean what he was writing. He was in therapy. He'd found a job at a property management company, entry-level, legitimate work. He was living in a studio in Coreytown with a roommate. He asked me the question I'd been expecting. "Grandpa," he said, "do you think you'll ever forgive him?" I held my cup in both hands and looked at the lights below. "I forgave him the day I walked out that door," I said. "But going back, that's something he has to earn. And I'm in no rush." Owen nodded. He understood. That was the thing about Owen. He always understood. We sat there until the cold drove us inside. For too many years, I confused love with surrender. I said yes when I should have said no. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. This is what I know now at 68 years old, standing on a balcony above the city I've spent my whole life in. Real family, real justice. It doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity, from the quiet decision to finally value yourself the way you always deserve to be valued, even if it takes you 3 decades to get there. If you're sitting somewhere right now, giving everything you have to people who take it without a single word of gratitude, don't wait 30 years like I did. Don't wait for someone to call you the handyman in your own home before you finally wake up. This has been my story. Not the kind with shouting and drama in every scene. The kind that happens in silence, in signed documents, in a truck driving up a mountain road while the city gets smaller in the mirror, in a cedar box that finally made it somewhere safe. If this story moves something in you, I hope you'll sit with it a while before you go on to whatever's next in your day. And if you know somebody who's been giving too much for too long, without ever once being asked to, maybe this is the story to pass along to them. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't raising their voice. It's setting the fork down, folding the napkin, and quietly building a different life than the one somebody else assumed they'd always have. The end.